life begins. Stone-built town on a broken plain, promised county roads from fire and rain. He wears his badge like a promise made, through every storm and every shade. Judge and sheriff steady and true, holding the line like a man must do. Robbers County, where the strong survive, where truth stays standing and justice rise. Through the darkest night and the longest day, they keep the law from drifting away. Promise County, hear it call. When trouble comes, they stand tall, built on faith and a fighting hand. This is the heart of a frontier land.
In a courthouse carved from stone and steel, they learn what truth and mercy feel. The guilty stand and the honest speak, while the mighty fall and the broken seek.
A president came from a distant shore to see what this little town stood for. And he found a place where law holds fast, where the future rises from a rugged past. Come this county where the strong survive, where truth stays standing and justice rise. Through the darkest night and the longest day, they keep their all from drifting away. Promise County, hear it call. When trouble comes, they stand tall, built on faith and a fighting hand. This is the heart of a frontier land.
But danger comes on a whispered wind, testing the line where the good men stand. Through loss survive, they hold their ground, where hope is built in a frontier town.
Promise County, where the strong survive, where truth stays standing and justice rise. Through the darkest night and the longest day, they keep them all from drifting away. Promise County, your story's told in iron will and hearts of gold, and every soul that calls it home will never stand alone.
Folks, before we sing this next song, we just want to take a moment and tell you where our strength really comes from.
We've been through storms, heartbreaks, long roads and miracles, and through it all, one thing stayed the same.
God never let go of us.
We ain't perfect, we've made mistakes, we've stumbled more than a few times.
But every time we fell, every single time, His grace picked us right back up.
So tonight, standing here with our family, our friends, and this beautiful crowd, we want to sing about the love that saved us, the faith that keeps us, and the God who never leaves us. This is grace carried us home.
I was lost like a shadow on a cold, dark night, walking blind through the valley, looking for light. But mercy found me where I fell so low, whispered, child, you're forgiven, come on home.
I was weary from the battles I tried to fight alone, carrying burdens I was never meant to own. But Jesus met me in the quiet of the dawn, said, daughter, drop your chains, the past is gone. And grace carried us home, through the fire, through the storm, through the unknown. When we stumbled and cried, He stayed right by our side with a love deeper than we
every tear was a seed He used to make us strong.
And every test became a testimony song. And grace carried us home. When we felt like giving up, we weren't alone. He healed what was broke, lifted hearts full of hope. Now we praise Him from the mountain to the valley below. Grace carried us. Grace carried us home. Hallelujah to the Savior who redeemed our pain. Hallelujah to the Lamb who washed every stain. We're standing here today 'cause He made a better way. By His love, by His mercy, by His holy name. Oh, grace carried us home.
Set our spirits free and made us fully known.
Now our voices rise high like a prayer to the sky. Thank you, Lord, we're never alone. Grace carried us. Grace carried us home.
Your laughter danced on vinyl lines in dusty rooms and summer signs. A record scratched, but still it played the sound of love that never fades. Spinning slow, our song remains in echoed notes and skipping strains. I close my eyes and hear it true, the melody composed of you. Let the needle wear its thin, I'll still replay where we've been. As long as sound lives on and through, I'll never stop rewinding you. Your laughter danced on vinyl lines in dusty rooms and summer signs. A record scratched, but still it played the sound of love that never fades. Spinning slow, our sign remains in echoed notes and skipping strains. I close my eyes and hear it true, a melody composed of you. Let the needle wear it thin, I'll still replay where we've been. As long as sound lives on and through, I'll never stop rewinding you. Your laughter danced on vinyl lines in dusty rooms and summer signs. A record scratched, but still it played the sound of love that never fades. Spinning slow, our song remains in echoed notes on skipping strains. I close my eyes and hear it true, a melody composed of you. Let the needle wear it thin, I'll still replay where we've been. As long as sound lives on and through, I'll never stop rewinding you.
Like a burnished coin pulled fresh from fire, casting long shadows across a land that had forgotten names but remembered pain. The town of promise lay half forgotten between rail lines and cattle trails, a place where men came to escape their past and women came to build something better than what the world had offered them. Lee Harris arrived on horseback just after dawn, the dust of the trail still clinging to his coat and boots. He was not a man looking for trouble, but trouble always seemed to recognize him first. He wore the kind of quiet that came from losing too much, and his eyes carried the weight of decisions that could never be undone. The town didn't greet him. It only watched. Annabella Harris had already been there 3 weeks, though it felt like longer. She was the schoolteacher, the church pianist, and the one person in Promise who still believed that words like future meant something real. The children trusted her quickly. The town's women leaned on her without asking. And the men, some admired her strength, others resented the way she made hope feel like a responsibility. Their meeting was not dramatic. It was simple, almost unremarkable. Lee tied his horse outside the church just as Annabella stepped out carrying him books. For a moment neither spoke. It was as if both of them understood that something had already shifted, even if neither of them could name it yet. Promise was not a safe town. It belonged to cattle interests who controlled water rights, freight routes, and the sheriff who had long stopped pretending he served anyone but himself. The people of Promise lived carefully, speaking softly, and paying debts that never seemed to shrink. Lee Harris had not come to fix anything. He had come because a man once owed him a favor, and that favor had finally come due in the form of a letter and a warning: Promise is about to burn. Annabella Harris saw what others missed. She saw the way Lee watched doorways before entering them. She saw how he never sat with his back to open windows. She saw how he measured people before speaking, like a man deciding whether mercy or steel would be required. And yet, when he played guitar that first night at the church gathering, something in him changed. The music was not for show. It was for memory, for grief, for everything he had buried under years of silence. Annabella sang beside him, her voice steady and warm, and the town, just for a moment, forgot to be afraid. But peace and promise never lasted long. A cattle company sent riders into town, demanding signatures on land papers that would strip families of everything they owned. The sheriff stood behind them, smiling like it was all routine business. When one farmer refused, the man was beaten in the street until even the dust seemed ashamed. Lee did not intervene that day. Not yet. He simply watched. Annabella did. And something in her hardened, not into bitterness, but into resolve. That night, she told Lee she was not leaving. Not the town. Not the people. Not even if it meant standing in front of guns she had no hope of winning against. Lee didn't argue. He only said he had heard that kind of courage before, and it usually ended in graves. But he stayed. Because men like Lee Harris don't leave when something still feels unfinished. The barn dance came a week later, held under lantern light and rough-hewn beams, with fiddles crying out like they remembered every heartbreak in the territory. For a few hours, Promise forgot its fear again. Lee and Annabella danced once, quietly, as if they were testing a future neither of them had admitted they wanted. Outside, riders gathered. The cattle company had come to take the town by force before word spread too far. The sheriff opened the gates himself. What followed was not a celebration. It was a turning point. Lee stepped out of the barn first, not fast, not angry, just certain. Annabella followed him, not behind him, but beside him. When the first shot rang out, the music inside didn't stop immediately. It faltered, then fell silent, like the town itself holding its breath. What happened in Promise that night became something people would later argue about in other towns, in other years. Some said Lee was a lawman reborn. Some said he was just a man who refused to let evil go unanswered anymore. All agreed on one thing: he did not miss. And Annabella, she did not run. When it was over, and the dust settled back into the street like it had never been disturbed, Promise was still standing. Not whole, not healed, but no longer helpless. The sheriff was gone. The cattle company retreated. And for the first time, the town belonged to itself again. Lee thought he would leave after that. Men like him always did. But Annabella met him at the edge of the church steps the next morning, holding a cup of coffee like it was a question and not an offer. She told him the school still needed rebuilding. The church still needed music. And the town still needed someone who knew how to stand between peace and violence without losing himself completely. Lee looked toward the horizon the way he always did, like he expected something to come for him from it. But for once, nothing came. So he stayed. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because for the first time in a long time, Going forward felt possible. And in the town of promise, under a sky that never quite decided between dust and gold, Lee Harris and Annabella Harris began again. Not as strangers, not as saviors, but as two people learning how to build a life in a place that refused to stay quiet. And that is where their story truly begins. The town of promise did not heal the way people expected it to. It didn't explode into celebration. It didn't suddenly become safe. Instead, it changed in quieter ways, like a wound slowly sealing but still tender to the touch. Windows that once stayed shuttered opened again. Men who used to speak in whispers began speaking in full sentences. The sheriff's badge was taken down from the wall of the saloon and no one bothered to replace it. But peace in the West was never something that stayed still. Lee Harris felt it first in the way the wind moved through town. Too steady, too intentional, like it was carrying news before anyone had spoken it aloud. Riders had been seen on the northern ridge. Not cattlemen. Not travelers. Men who didn't announce themselves. Annabella noticed it in the schoolchildren. Even they had started looking toward the hills when they heard horses in the distance. She didn't ask Lee if something was coming. She already knew the answer. Instead, she asked him something simpler. Are you going to leave again when it gets bad? Lee didn't answer right away. That was his habit, measuring truth before speaking it. I don't leave when it gets bad, he finally said. I leave when there's nothing left worth standing in front of. Annabella looked at him for a long moment, like she was deciding whether to argue or accept it. Then she said, Then you're going to be here a long time. It was not a warning. It was not fear. It was understanding. The trouble came in stages. First came the land surveyors, official looking men with papers and false politeness, measuring ground that didn't belong to them any more than the sky did. They spoke of expansion, rail access, and progress. They never spoke of families. Then came the hired riders, more of them than before. Better armed, quieter, no longer testing the town, but preparing it. And then came the message. Not written, not delivered, just understood. Promise was being reclaimed. Lee read the signs and did not speak of them immediately. Instead, he walked the town. He watched who stood tall and who avoided eye contact. He listened to conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. That night, he and Annabella sat inside the small church after everyone had gone home. The lantern light flickered against wooden pews, and dust drifted through the air like slow snow. I can get people out, Lee said finally. Annabella shook her head. And then what? They run forever. That's better than what's coming. Not to them, she said. Silence stretched between them. Then Annabella stood and walked to the piano. She didn't play anything at first. Just placed her hands on the keys. I came here to build something, she said softly. Not abandon it the first time it got hard. Lee leaned back in the pew, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. You're not built for this kind of fight, he said. Annabella finally played a chord, soft, steady. Neither are you, she replied. But you still show up to it. That was the moment something changed again, not in the town, but in them. Because love and promise was never loud. It never announced itself. It just kept standing there when everything else tried to push it away. The attack came on a Sunday. Not during worship. After. When people were still lingering outside the church, talking, laughing, thinking, for one brief moment, that the worst had already passed them by. The first shot shattered that belief. Dust rose like a curtain being pulled across the world. Lee moved before thought. Not toward cover, but toward the street. Annabella followed him again, like she had decided that standing behind him was no longer an option. But this time, she was not empty-handed. She had a pistol she had never fired before. The town did not collapse. That was the surprising part. It fought back. Not because it was prepared, but because it had finally decided it belonged to itself. And in the middle of it all, Lee and Annabella became something the town would talk about for years afterward. Not heroes. Not legends. Just two people who refused to move when everything told them to. When it was over, truly over, not just paused, the riders were gone. The cattle company's reach broke like glass under pressure. And Promise, for the first time, stopped being a place people feared and started being a place people protected. But victory always leaves something behind. That night, Annabella sat on the church steps alone, still shaking slightly, not from fear anymore, but from the cost of standing firm. Lee joined her quietly. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, she said, "Do you think it ever gets easier?" Lee looked out at the town, at the lanterns still burning, at the silhouettes moving through dust and light. "No," he said, "but it gets worth it." Annabella leaned her head slightly toward him. "That's not much comfort." "It's enough," he said. And in that moment, under a sky full of dust and promise and everything still unfinished, they both understood something neither of them had said out loud yet. They were not just surviving the West anymore. They were building something inside it. And whatever came next, whatever name it carried, whatever town it touched, they would meet it the same way they had always met everything else. Together. The church doors creaked softly as the young man stepped inside, dust still clinging to his boots like he had not stopped riding since the moment he ran. Annabella was at the piano when he entered. The last note she had been practicing still hung in the air, gentle and unfinished, like it didn't want to be interrupted. Lee Harris sat a few pews back, one arm resting along the bench, the other loosely near his belt, not tense, just aware. That was how he lived now in Promise. Not expecting violence, but never completely forgetting it existed. The boy took off his hat like he had been taught. For a second he just stood there, breathing hard, trying to find the right words. "Mister, I hear you're Sheriff Lee Harris of this town." Lee gave a slight nod, calm as ever. "That's what they call me." "Come on in. Sit down. You look like you've been riding since the edge of the world." "What's your name?" "Name's Caleb, sir," the boy said, sitting on the front pew like his legs might give out if he stayed standing. I come from north of the river camps." Annabella quietly closed the piano lid and turned toward them, listening now instead of playing. Lee leaned forward a little. "All right, Caleb. Tell me what brought you all the way into Promise like this." The boy swallowed hard. "There's a group coming," he said. "Outlaws. But they ain't just outlaws. They're hired by a cattle company, same kind that's been pushing towns out west of here." Lee didn't interrupt. He just watched him. Caleb continued, voice shaking but steadying as he spoke. "I was at their meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was just hauling supplies. But I heard them talkin', planning it. I slipped out before they caught me listening. Been riding ever since." Annabella's expression tightened slightly, but she didn't speak. Lee's voice stayed low. "What exactly are they planning?" Caleb looked down at his hands like he didn't want the words to exist. "They're gonna hit Promise when the first snow falls," he said. "Say it covers tracks. They'll come in like travelers at first, nothing suspicious. Then they'll plant dynamite. Store buildings, water lines, maybe even the church. They said anything that can break a town's backbone." The church seemed to grow quieter as he spoke. Caleb pushed on. Like once it started, he couldn't stop it. "They're gonna rob the bank while half the town's distracted. Drive off cattle, horses, and if anybody resists." He stopped, shook his head. "They talked about making an example out of whoever stands in their way." Lee didn't move. But something in his eyes shifted, like a door had just closed somewhere inside him that only opened when danger became real. Caleb looked up fast. "Sir, I ain't part of it. I swear." I heard what they done to towns before. My father was a lawman. They killed him for trying to stop men like this. I couldn't just stay there and do nothing. Annabella stepped closer now, standing beside the pew instead of behind it. What makes you think they're truly coming here? She asked gently. Caleb hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, crumpled, dirty, like it had been carried too close to a fire. Lee took it and opened it slowly. A crude map. Promise marked on it like a target. And beneath it, a note. First snow. Clean sweep. No witnesses. Lee exhaled once through his nose, slow and controlled. Then he folded the paper back exactly how it had been. Annabella watched him carefully. Lee. He didn't look up right away. Instead, he said, "How many men?" Caleb answered quickly. "Too many. I heard 20, maybe more. Some say hired guns in 3 different counties. They're organized, sir. Not just riders. They've got explosives, timing, signals." Silence settled again. Outside, a wind brushed past the church like it was listening. Finally, Lee stood. Not rushed. Not panicked. Just decided. He looked at Caleb. "You did the right thing coming here." Caleb let out a breath he'd been holding since he arrived. "But I don't know what I've started," the boy added quietly. Lee's voice softened just a little. "You didn't start it," he said. "You just brought it to where it needed to be." Annabella looked between them. "What do we do now?" Lee glanced toward the window, toward the town beyond it, the piece they had built with their own hands, fragile but real. Then he said something simple. "Now we prepare." A pause. Then Caleb asked, almost afraid of the answer, "Can you stop them?" Lee looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know what happens if we don't try." And for the first time since arriving in Promise, Caleb realized he hadn't just brought a warning. He had brought a war to the only town that still believed it could live without one. And outside, far beyond the church and the schoolhouse and the quiet streets of Promise, winter clouds began gathering on the horizon, slow, patient, and certain. The church bell cut through Promise like a warning shot that didn't need bullets. At first, only a few heads turned. Then the second ring hit the air, long, urgent, unmistakable. And by the third ring, people were moving. Annabella stood at the rope, pulling it with steady strength, her face set with focus as the bell echoed across the town. She didn't stop. Not until Lee stepped beside her and placed a hand lightly on her arm. "That's enough," he said quietly. They heard it. Below them, Promise began to change shape. Doors flew open. People stepped into the streets. Horses were brought out of barns mid-saddling. Wagons rolled before they were fully loaded. Children were lifted up and carried without questions being asked. Because in a town like Promise, a church bell didn't mean, "Come for service." It meant everything has changed. Lee stepped out onto the church steps where the whole town could see him. Caleb stood nearby, still breathing hard, watching like he had just stepped into something far bigger than himself. Lee raised his voice, not shouting, but carrying. "Listen close." The town quieted. "I don't have time to dress this up," he said. "There's a force coming our way. Armed men. Organized. Paid for. They're coming to burn this town off the map when the first snow hits." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Lee lifted a hand and it stopped. Annabella stood beside him now, holding folded papers, notes she had already begun writing. Lee continued. "We are not scattering. We are not abandoning Promise. We are going to protect what we built." He turned slightly, pointing toward the edge of town where the storm cellar entrance sat near the church foundation, built years ago for tornado seasons, never truly used for anything serious until now. "There's a shelter under this church," he said. "Big enough for people. Big enough for supplies. Big enough for livestock if we do this right." A few men exchanged glances. That part they understood. Lee didn't slow down. We're not waiting for them to choose when this happens. We're choosing where we stand. Annabella stepped forward now, voice calm but firm. We need runners, she said. Fast riders. Right now. She held up the papers she had written. Each of you takes one. Signed by Sheriff Harris and myself. It tells every ranch family the same thing. This is not optional. Bring your cattle. Bring your horses. Bring your food stores. Bring your children. If you can't travel fast, you travel together. If you can't travel together, you follow the smoke from the church and you find us. She handed the notes to the boys as she spoke. Jim took one first. Then Conrad. Stevens. Ben. Jimmy. Lee pointed at them as they mounted up. You don't stop riding, he said. You don't stop for nothing. You get the Cartwells first. Then the Maxwells. Then Johnsons, Hatfields, Wranglers. Every family in this valley understands the same message. Promise is under emergency protection. One of the riders asked, what if they don't believe us? Lee didn't hesitate. Then you show them the bell still ringing in their ears. The horses moved out in bursts of dust, splitting in different directions like the town itself was sending out its own lifelines. Behind them, the town began to work like it had never worked before. Wagons were loaded with grain sacks and blankets. Barrels were rolled. Lantern oil collected. Tools gathered, not just for survival, but for defense. Men opened trapdoors and moved into the storm cellar beneath the church. It wasn't small like most frontier shelters. It was wide, reinforced timber and stone, built years ago with the idea that someday the weather would be worse than anything people could handle above ground. Today, it became something else. A fortress beneath faith. Lee descended first, checking the structure, measuring space with his eyes the way he always measured danger. Annabella followed, counting aloud under her breath as she planned placement. Livestock on the west side, she said. Families here. Supplies along the walls. Clear path through the center. A rancher stepped in behind them, leading two horses carefully down the ramp. We can fit more than this, he said, amazed. Lee nodded. We're going to. Above them, the town kept moving. Not panicking. Organizing. Cooperating. For the first time, Promise wasn't reacting to danger. It was building a response to it. Caleb stood at the entrance for a moment, watching everything happen. The riders disappearing into distance, the town mobilizing, the shelter filling. He looked at Lee. You really think this will hold them off? Lee met his eyes. No, he said honestly. It won't stop them from coming. Caleb swallowed. Then what's the plan? Lee glanced toward Annabella, then back toward the boy. The plan, he said, is that when they get here, they don't find a town that's afraid. A pause. They find a town that's already standing where it needs to stand. Above them, the last wagon rolled toward the church. And far out beyond the valley, where the sky had started turning pale and cold, the first hint of winter pressed closer, quiet as a secret, heavy as a promise that had finally decided to be kept. I'm with you on the story direction. You're building a classic frontier, last stand, western with strategy, deception, and a hidden stronghold. I can continue it, but I need to slightly ground a couple things so it stays in a believable Old West tone, like John Wayne era films. Instead of modern style, bomb making, or overly technical tactics, I'll translate your idea into period accurate frontier defenses, traps, and lawman strategy while keeping your storyline intact. Here's the continuation. Lee Harris stood in the middle of the church cellar as the town moved above him like a living machine. Wagons creaked. Horses stamped. Voices echoed down through the floorboards like distant thunder. He didn't raise his voice this time. Because everyone was already listening. This is the plan, Lee said. He stepped onto an old crate so everyone could see him clearly. Ranchers, mothers, riders, townsmen, even Caleb standing near the stairwell. We turn promise into something it is not. A few men frowned. Annabella stayed still beside him, watching carefully. Lee continued. We empty every storefront, every shelf, every barrel, every visible sign of life above ground. A rancher spoke up. You're talking about abandoning the town. No, Lee said calmly. I'm talking about disguising it. That got their attention. He turned slightly, pointing upward. By the time they ride in, Promise will look like it's been dead for months. Dust in the streets, empty shelves, saloon doors hanging loose, cold ash in stoves. No smoke, no sound, no reason to believe anything is left here worth taking. A murmur passed through the crowd. Now they understood. Annabella added, her voice steady, we'll scatter supplies below ground. Food, water, ammunition, medical kits. Anything valuable stays out of sight. Lee nodded. And we don't just wait, he said. We watch. He looked toward the ranchers. We set lookouts in the church tower, the grain lofts, the ridge above town. Nobody moves without being seen first. Every rider who enters Promise is observed before they ever realize they're being watched. Caleb shifted slightly, then spoke up. Sir, I can recognize them. The men I saw. I remember their brands. Their horses. Lee's eyes sharpened slightly. You're sure? Caleb nodded quickly. I never forget a mark like that. My father taught me. Brands tell you who a man belongs to, even if he lies about everything else. Lee pointed to him. You'll work with Annabella, he said. You write everything you remember. Every detail. Every face you can recall. Annabella didn't hesitate. We'll make descriptions. Clothing, weapons, habits. Everything. A rancher near the back spoke. You planning on posting wanted notices? Lee exhaled slowly. Yes, he said. But not like you're thinking. He walked a few steps, choosing his words carefully. In this town, we don't need papers from a distant courthouse. We know what's coming, and we know what it's made of. If a man comes into Promise with violence in his saddlebag, we will treat him as a threat to this town's survival. That wasn't said like a boast. It was said like a responsibility. Annabella stepped closer to Lee. And the old well? She asked quietly. Lee nodded. There's a dry well behind the East Ridge. Old mining shaft. Someone started turning it into a shelter years ago and abandoned it. He looked at the men. That becomes our holding place. If we take someone alive, they go there. Secure. Contained. No harm unless they force it. The room went quiet. Not because they disagreed. Because they understood the seriousness. Lee continued. We are not calling outside help. No cavalry. No marshals from 100 miles away. He looked around the room. I am the law here. And so are all of you when this town is threatened. A rancher nodded slowly. Then another. Then another. Annabella looked at Lee, not surprised, but steady with him. Caleb finally asked, quieter now, and when they come in thinking the town is empty. Lee looked toward the stairs leading up into daylight. Then they'll walk into a town that already knows their names, he said. Before they ever draw a weapon. A long pause. Then he added something softer, but more dangerous than anything else he'd said. And they'll realize too late. That Promise was never abandoned. It was waiting. The church basement had turned into something it was never meant to be. Not a place of hymns anymore. A planning room. Lantern light flickered against stone walls, casting long shadows across rough tables that had been dragged down from the schoolhouse above. The air smelled faintly of dust, ink, and old paper, like memory being forced into shape. Annabella sat at the center table with a pencil in hand, sleeves rolled slightly, hair pulled back so she could work without distraction. Papers were spread in front of her in neat sections. Caleb sat across from her. At first, he didn't know what to do with his hands. You sure you want me doing this, ma'am? He asked quietly. Annabella didn't look up right away. You said you remember them clearly. Yes, ma'am. Then you're exactly who we need. That settled something in him. He leaned forward. Annabella slid a blank sheet of paper toward him. Start with the first man you saw. Don't worry about being perfect. Just be honest. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. Tall, he said slowly. Real tall. Broad shoulders. Had a scar running down the left side of his jaw like a knife cut that never healed right. Annabella wrote carefully. Caleb continued. Wore a dark coat, long dusted edges. Black hat, wide brim. But the strange thing was his gloves, clean. Too clean for a man riding that far. Annabella paused slightly. Anything about his voice? Caleb thought. Low, he said. Like he didn't waste words. Like every sentence cost him something. Annabella labeled the page. Unknown leader. Possible command rider. She moved to a second sheet. Next man, she said. Caleb exhaled. This one was different. Nervous energy. Kept checking his saddlebags like he didn't trust them. Blonde beard, patchy. Missing one tooth in front when he talked. Annabella wrote. Secondary rider. Possible explosives handler. Across the room, Lee Harris stood quietly near the stairwell, listening without interrupting. He didn't interfere. He didn't rush them. He just observed the way truth was being shaped into something usable. Caleb kept going. There was a third man, he said. Shorter. Quick hands. Gun belt worn in tight like he'd been in fights before. Had a tattoo on his wrist. Couldn't read it, but it looked like a mark from some outfit. Annabella wrote that down too. Then she stopped. Caleb, she asked gently, the brands. You said you recognized them. Caleb nodded quickly, relieved to move to something more certain. Yes, ma'am. I did. He pulled out a small scrap of wood he had carved marks into while riding. I copied them best I could remember. He slid it across the table. Annabella leaned in. There were 3 distinct cattle brands burned into the wood. Not local ranch marks. Organized symbols. Controlled ownership marks. Lee stepped closer now for the first time. He studied them. Those aren't ranch brands, he said quietly. Caleb shook his head. No, sir. They were on every horse I saw. Same pattern, different placement depending on rank. That confirmed what everyone feared. Annabella's expression tightened slightly, but she stayed calm. Then they're not just riders, she said. They're structured, organized. Lee nodded once. That means discipline, coordination. They'll move like an army, not a gang. Caleb swallowed. That's what it felt like. Annabella began organizing the papers into a stack. We turn these into posters, she said. Not official ones. Not from any government. From us. Lee looked at her. You sure you want your name attached to that? Annabella didn't hesitate. If they're coming for this town, she said, then I want them knowing who stands in their way. She began writing at the top of the first sheet. Not fancy. Not decorative. Just clear. Wanted. Identified threats to promise. Caleb watched her work. I've never seen a schoolteacher do this before, he said quietly. Annabella didn't look up. I've never lived in a town that needed it before. Lee folded his arms slightly, watching both of them. What about the leader? He asked. Caleb pointed to the first description. He's the one they listened to. Nobody questioned him. When he spoke, the rest went quiet. Lee's eyes narrowed slightly. Then he's the one we prepare for first. Annabella set the finished sheet aside and started another. Caleb hesitated. Ma'am, Sheriff, what happens if we get them wrong? Lee answered without looking away from the paper. Then we adjust. A pause. But we don't hesitate. The lantern flickered overhead. And in that underground room beneath the church, Promise quietly stopped being a town preparing for trouble. And became a town building its response to it. Annabella added the final line at the bottom of the first poster. Approach Promise at your own risk. She set the pencil down. And for the first time that night, no one spoke. because everyone in the room understood the same thing at the same moment. The story had moved past warning. It was now waiting for arrival. The cellar beneath the church had become something between a command room and a frontier courthouse. The lanterns burned steady now. Annabella stood at the long table with Caleb beside her, both of them focused on the stack of papers growing thicker by the minute. Caleb described what he saw. Annabella shaped it into order. Names didn't matter yet, only patterns, behavior, danger, structure. Each man became a profile. Each profile became a warning. Annabella wrote clean, deliberate lines at the top of each sheet. Identified threat, Promise Town security file. Caleb pointed, corrected, remembered. Annabella refined it into something readable, something usable. And when the stack was done, she placed them together in a neat bundle and looked up toward the stairwell. That's when Lee Harris came down. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The entire room already quieted the moment his boots hit the last step. He took the bundle from Annabella's hands and flipped through it slowly. Not hurried. Not emotional. Just measuring what kind of storm they were facing. When he finished, he placed the papers down on the table. Good work, he said simply. Then he pulled out his stamp. Old brass seal. Sheriff's authority for promise. He pressed it down onto the first page. A heavy thump echoed in the room. Then he signed beneath it in bold ink. Sheriff Lee Harris, Town of Promise. He looked at the room. These men are now officially wanted, he said. For criminal conspiracy, intent to destroy civilian settlement, and armed aggression against this town. A pause. But listen to me clearly. His voice stayed calm, but firm enough that nobody moved. We bring them in alive if we can. Caleb looked up. Alive, sir. Lee nodded once. Alive. Every one of them we can hold accountable. Annabella added quietly, this town is not becoming like them. Lee continued, they will face judgment. That may be prison. That may be the court system. And if a man refuses arrest and chooses violence instead, he paused, then the outcome is his choice, not ours. That settled over the room like weight and law at the same time. A rancher near the back spoke up. What about the cattle families? They're still coming in. Lee nodded. Their priority. Above ground, Promise was changing again. Dust still clung to the streets, but now it was intentional. Storefronts were emptied. Saloon shelves cleared. Chairs overturned just slightly, like a town that had left in a hurry and never returned. But beneath it all, movement. Life. Protection. Within the hour, riders began returning from the countryside. First came the Cartwells. Then the Maxwells. Then the Johnsons, Hatfields, Wranglers, whole families moving as one unit. Wagons creaked under the weight of food stores, blankets, grain sacks, tools, and children wrapped in coats too big for them. Horses were led carefully. Cattle were guided in long, shifting lines that filled the edges of town like living fences. The churchyard became a staging ground. Lee met them personally at the entrance. Annabella coordinated directions, guiding families toward the underground shelter without panic, without confusion, just steady instruction. Livestock this way. Families together. Supplies marked and stored. Caleb helped at her side now, more confident with every passing minute. He pointed out details, helped guide wagons, remembered faces and names. For the first time since arriving, he wasn't just a messenger. He was part of the town. As the last of the families moved underground, Lee climbed briefly into the watch position above the church. The ridge lines beyond Promise were quiet. Too quiet. He lowered his binoculars. They're close, he said under his breath. Caleb appeared beside him on the ladder access, slightly out of breath. Sir, I think I see one rider on the north trail. Trail. Lee didn't look away immediately. Then he said, describe him. Caleb squinted into the distance. Dark coat. Wide hat. He went still. Then his voice dropped. That's him. Lee turned now. Which one? Caleb swallowed hard. The first one. The leader. A long silence followed. Lee studied the ridge. Then he spoke calmly into the wind. Tell Annabella to prepare the second stage. Caleb hesitated. Second stage. Lee's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. They just arrived, he said. Now the town begins to respond. Down below, the hidden shelter doors quietly closed. Above ground, Promise looked empty. Abandoned. Dead. And waiting. But inside it, behind walls, under streets, and in the silence between dust and wind, it was fully alive. Going to continue it. Here's the continuation. Caleb turned slightly toward Lee, breath tight but steady. Yes, sir, he said. I know their names. Lee didn't rush him. He just waited. Then he said calmly, Tell Annabella. Stage 3. Caleb nodded once and moved fast down the steps into the church cellar. Above ground, the wind shifted again. Lee reached into his coat and pulled out a small mirror, polished, old, used for signaling. He angled it just enough to catch the sunlight breaking through the cloud cover. A flash. Then another. From the distant ridge lines, hidden watchers answered in return, brief glints of reflected light. Confirmation. They were in position. Lee lowered the mirror. Let them come in, he said quietly. The riders entered Promise just after midday. 3 men. Slow. Controlled. Confident. They stopped at the edge of the street. The first man looked around, squinting. Well, he muttered, this is the quietest town I've ever seen. Another rider laughed softly. Too quiet. They dismounted. Dust rose around their boots. The saloon doors creaked as they pushed inside. The interior was still. Empty tables. Still glasses. Dust thick on the bar. One of them frowned. This place has been abandoned for months. The second man nodded slowly. Maybe years. The leader stepped further in, uneasy now. So where did everybody go? Silence answered him. Then, a sharp click behind them. The doors closed. Not slammed. Just closed. Controlled. The men turned. Too late. The room shifted. From behind counters, beneath tables, and through side doors, men stepped out quietly, ranchers, deputies, townsmen. Caleb's voice came from the stairwell outside. Now, the capture was swift. Not chaotic. Not loud. Precise. The riders were disarmed before they could fully react. Guns taken, belts secured, knives removed, all done in moments of overwhelming coordination. No shots fired. No struggle that lasted long enough to matter. Within minutes, the 3 men were secured. Outside, horses were led away and identified by their brands, carefully recorded and matched against Caleb's earlier descriptions. Lee stepped into the saloon doorway after it was done. He looked at the captured men, then at the town working together in silence. Move them to holding, he said. Below ground, in the old mine shaft jail converted from the abandoned well system, the prisoners were brought down carefully and secured in reinforced containment cells built from stone and timber. It wasn't a prison in the modern sense. It was a frontier holding place, structured, controlled, and guarded. Lee stood above it all with Annabella and Caleb. This is temporary, Lee said. They are held for lawful processing. Nothing more. Annabella nodded. And safe custody is maintained. Caleb swallowed. They didn't even see it coming. Lee turned to him. That's the point, he said. Back upstairs, Lee climbed the church steps again. The town had changed completely in a matter of hours. What had looked like a ghost town was now something else entirely. A net. A plan. A law. Lee looked over the gathered men. I'm going to say this once, he said. His voice carried across the street. I am deputizing every able man in Promise. A pause. Even the wind seemed to quiet. You will protect this town. You will follow lawful orders. And you will act as deputies under my authority. He looked directly at Caleb. And you, he said. You brought this warning. You stood your ground. You didn't run. Caleb straightened slightly. Lee stepped forward. I'm deputizing you as well. A beat. Caleb blinked. Me, sir. Yes, Lee said. You're one of us now. He turned slightly toward the crowd. And from this moment forward, any attack on this town is an attack on every deputy standing here. Annabella stepped beside him. And this town stands together, she added quietly. The men nodded. No speeches followed. No celebration. Just understanding. Because out beyond the ridge, more riders were still coming. And Promise was no longer a ghost town. It was a trap waiting for the next step. Lee Harris stood on the church steps for a moment longer than anyone expected him to. The wind moved through Promise like it was testing the town, looking for weakness and finding none. He turned slightly, looking over the men gathered below, ranchers, riders, deputies, Caleb standing near the edge of the group, still adjusting to the weight of everything that had changed so fast. Lee's voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Back to your posts, he said. A few men shifted, already moving. Eyes open, ears open. If something moves that shouldn't move, you don't hesitate, you report it. Quiet, controlled, no panic. He stepped down one step from the church platform, closer to them now, not above them. You all know how to do this, he continued. Trappers, hunters, ranch hands, some of you military, some law enforcement. You've all lived in situations where silence keeps you alive. He glanced briefly at Caleb, then back to the group. That's what we do now. A pause. Then his tone softened slightly, not losing authority, just shedding pressure. I swore a long time ago I was done with this life, Lee said. That made a few heads turn. My brother died because men like this came through a town that wasn't ready, he continued. And I promised myself I'd never stand in this position again. A quiet moment followed. Even the dust seemed still. Lee exhaled slowly. But I can't stand by and watch another town get taken apart like that. Not Promise. Not this place. Annabella watched him from the church doorway, steady and silent, understanding every word without needing explanation. Lee's voice firmed again, but stayed controlled. So we do it right. No chaos. No heroics. No rushing in blind. He gestured toward the town around them. You move back to your positions. You hold your ground. You watch everything that moves in and out of this street. He pointed once toward the ridge line beyond town. And if they show themselves again, we see them first. Caleb stepped forward slightly. What about signals, sir? Lee nodded once. Good question. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small cloth strip. 2 tugs on rope lines means movement on the north ridge. 1 long whistle means riders entering town. No whistle means stay silent and hold position. He looked around the group. And nobody acts alone. You see something. You report it. You don't chase it. A rancher spoke up. And if they start something. Lee didn't hesitate. Then we respond as a town, he said. Not as individuals. A slow nod moved through the group. Not fear. Not excitement. Just readiness. Lee stepped back again toward the church. Move, he said again, but now it wasn't urgency. It was rhythm. It was structure. It was command under control. Back to positions. Quietly. Like you were never here. One by one, they broke away, slipping into storefronts, lofts, barn shadows, upper windows, ridge lines. Not scattered. Planned. Caleb hesitated near Annabella. She looked at him gently. You're with me, she said. We'll keep the center watch. Caleb nodded. Lee watched the town settle back into its false appearance, empty, abandoned, lifeless on the surface. But underneath it, it was listening, waiting, ready. And as Lee stepped back into the church door, its appearance empty, abandoned, lifeless on the surface. But underneath it, it was listening, waiting, ready. And as Lee stepped back into the church doorway, he spoke one last time, quieter now almost to himself. Let them think they have the advantage, he said. Annabella looked at him. Lee's eyes stayed on the empty street. Because the worst thing they can walk into is a town that already knows how they move. Outside, the wind carried dust down Main Street like a slow-moving warning. And Promise waited. The dust on the edge of Promise hadn't even settled from the last movement when the next riders appeared. Slow at first. Just silhouettes on the ridge. Then closer, real shapes now, horses cutting down the slope into town. From the church tower, Caleb lowered his spyglass slightly. More riders, he whispered into the signal line. Below him, the watchmen didn't move. They didn't need to yet. Because this time, something was different. The riders weren't talking like the first group had. No confidence. No ease. Just tension. One of them reined his horse in hard at the edge of Main Street. He looked left. Then right. Where are they? He muttered. Another rider frowned. Where's the other unit? The leader of this second group pulled his head back slightly, scanning the town. That ain't right, he said slowly. There should have been men here already. They saw it now, the empty windows. The still doors. The dust too evenly spread. The silence too complete. One of the horses stomped nervously. Feels wrong, another rider said. Then they noticed something else. Tracks. Horse tracks leading out of town, fresh enough to read, but spaced just enough to look like a withdrawal. The leader squinted down at them. Those boys pulled out, he said. A pause. That's what it looks like. Another rider nodded slowly. Maybe they spooked. Saw something they didn't like. Or maybe they already set up and left us to walk into it blind. The leader didn't like that answer. But he liked silence less. We were told to move fast, he said. Not hesitate. He looked back toward the empty street again. No bodies. No smoke. No movement. Then he made a decision. All right, he said. We go in. Carefully. Spread out. Keep eyes open. They dismounted. Boots hit dust. The sound echoed too loud for a town that was supposed to be abandoned. They moved toward the saloon first. Doors creaked open. Inside, empty bar. Broken glass. Dust thick on the counter like it had been there a lifetime. One rider frowned. This don't sit right, he said. Nobody leaves a place this clean without a reason. The leader stepped in further, hand hovering near his holster. Check the back rooms, he ordered. The riders spread out. That's when the first quiet mistake happened. A floorboard didn't creak like old wood should. It clicked. Soft. Too precise. The leader froze. You hear that? He asked. Before anyone could answer, the doors behind them swung shut. Not slammed. Just closed. Controlled. Locked from the outside. The riders spun. And in that instant, the ghost town stopped being a ghost town. From behind counters, from shadowed stairwells, from false walls and empty barrels, men moved. Not rushing. Not panicking. Steady. Calm. Like they had been waiting all along. Caleb's voice came through a hidden line from above, sharp and controlled. Now. The second group realized too late that the horse tracks weren't escape. They were bait. And Promise wasn't abandoned. It was stage. The leader reached for his weapon, but found only air where his holster had been. Already taken. Lee Harris stepped forward from the shadow of the saloon back room. Not fast. Not angry. Just present. You boys are in the wrong town, he said quietly. The leader stared at him, jaw tight. You Sheriff Harris. Lee nodded once. I am. A long silence stretched. Then Lee added, calm as iron. And you're going to put your hands where I can see them. Outside, the wind rolled through Promise again. But this time it wasn't empty. It was full of a town holding its breath, waiting to see what the next move would be. His jaw tightened. For a second, the whole saloon went still. Then he moved. Fast. He lunged forward, trying to shove Lee off balance and break the moment of control. But Lee Harris didn't stumble. He turned with it, caught the man's arm, and drove him back into the edge of the bar with a heavy thud that rattled glass and dust from the shelves. The room snapped into tension. No one else moved. This wasn't chaos. This was personal. The leader straightened quickly, wiping dust from his coat with a sharp glare. You think you're law here. You think you're law here. He spat. Lee stepped forward once. Just once. Close enough that the man could feel it. I don't think it, Lee said quietly. I am it. The leader swung first. A hard right. Lee blocked it clean, stepped inside the motion, and drove a counterstrike that snapped the man's head slightly to the side and sent him stumbling into the table behind him. Wood creaked. The room stayed silent. The leader pushed back up, breathing heavier now, anger rising. Lee didn't rush him. He just watched, letting him see it wasn't about strength. It was about control. The man came again, wild this time. Lee met him halfway. A sharp strike stopped the forward motion.
Then another, clean, decisive, enough to break the rhythm of aggression without turning it into something uncontrolled. The leader staggered back against the bar, gripping it for balance. He glared up at Lee. "You think you're better than us?" he growled. That's when Lee stepped in close enough that only he could hear the next words. "You cow rustlin', town-destroying punks," Lee said low, steady, controlled. "You're just no good, rotten, two-bit yellow bellies coming into my town trying to stir up trouble." A pause. The leader's breathing slowed slightly, anger turning uncertain. Lee's eyes didn't blink. "You want to know something?" Lee continued. His voice stayed calm, but carried weight like steel. "The good Lord speaks to us in strange ways. But you know what?" He leaned in just slightly. "We already know." A silence followed that felt heavier than the fight itself. Outside the saloon, the town remained perfectly still. Not because nothing was happening, but because everyone knew what was happening inside. The leader finally lowered his hands a fraction, not in surrender, but in realization that this wasn't a man he could intimidate. Lee stepped back half a step. Not finishing it. Not escalating it. Just ending the moment. "Put him in holding," Lee said calmly. And for the first time since they rode into Promise, the outlaws understood something they hadn't before. This town wasn't abandoned. It was governed. And it was already awake.
To be continued.
Out on the edge where the dust runs thin, a lawman stands where the fight begins. Stone-built town on a broken plain, Promise County rose from fire and rain. He wears his badge like a promise made, through every storm and every shade. Judge and sheriff steady and true, holding the line like a man must do. Promise County, where the strong survive, where truth stays standing and justice rise. Through the darkest night and the longest day, they keep the law from drifting away. Promise County, hear it call. When trouble comes, they stand tall, built on faith and a fighting hand. This is the heart of a frontier land.
In a courthouse car from stone and steel, they learn what truth and mercy feel. The guilty stand and the honest speak, while the mighty fall and the broken seek.
A president came from a distant shore to see what this little town stood for. And he found a place where law holds fast, where the future rises from a rugged past. Compass County, where strong survive, where truth stays standing and justice rise. Through the darkest night and the longest day, they keep their all from drifting away. Promise County, hear it call. When trouble comes, they stand tall, built on faith and a fighting hand. This is the heart of a frontier land.
But danger comes on a whispered wind, testing the line where the good men stand. Through loss of fire, they hold their ground, where hope is built in a frontier town.